You are listening to Range Minded from Independence Indoor Shooting. Before we get started, we want to remind you to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Range Minded Podcast, and you can email us at podcast@iishooting.com as well. Plus, leave us some feedback if you could from wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help us out. This is episode 71, where we talk about some common myths and misconceptions about gun control and gun violence, and we also talk about what we as gun owners can do to be good stewards of the Second Amendment and keep our Second Amendment rights as well. Now, keep in mind that the opinions we have here are only our own and don't necessarily reflect the views of Independence Indoor Shooting or anyone except for ourselves. With that out of the way, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy episode 71 of Range Minded, the myths and misconceptions about gun violence. Hello and welcome to Range Minded from Independence Indoor Shooting. My name is Mark Long, and I am joined, as always, by
Steve Zimmerman.
There he is, Joey Zuzu, Steve Zimmerman himself right here.
So Mark, and maybe you guys have no clue either. So a long time ago, if you remember Isuzu, they had some commercials that were kind of funny, and the main character of the commercial was Joey Suzu. So I guess maybe I'm not cool at all, but I think I am.
Maybe you're just dating yourself a little bit there.
Oh, well, you know what? That's acceptable nowadays.
I like what you did there. Well done. So, but today we're going to talk about, we're going to do a myths and misconceptions episode because I think you and I both feel that knowledge is power with a lot of different things. And I think there's a lot of misinformation and myths and a lot of misunderstanding that's going out there, especially right now about guns and gun control and gun crime and all that kind of stuff. And so we want to do our best to try to, at least set the record straight or at least educate people that maybe haven't thought about it and arm you with some information. If you talk to people who are maybe anti-gun or maybe you're on the fence about it.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the times when this stuff pops up, and actually, let me jump back. I'll preface this a little bit. Any kind of mass murder event, any loss of life in this kind of a scenario is terrible, right? I mean, no matter what, we shouldn't have to lose anybody to a violent murderer.
100%.
But, some of the stuff that the media splurs out, even conservative media now, is pretty ridiculous. Yeah, and that kind of leads me to my first point. We'll just jump right in here. Is that one of the big myths, I think, or what people subscribe to is that the gun control debate is binary. It's either you want gun control or you're okay with dead bodies. And that honestly could not be farther from the truth. You and I have talked about that before. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's at best, it's kind of disrespectful to people who are responsible gun owners because every time, something happens or whatever, and I see all the rhetoric and emotionally charged, arguments or opinions that come out on social media, whatever, it makes me feel bad as a gun owner,
Yeah. And they do that on purpose. Like they other us out from the rest of society. We're the dredges of society if you own a gun. Much like, and maybe you're not old enough to remember, but it is exactly like, not much, but exactly like what they did to smokers and cigarette makers in the 70s and 80s. I'm old enough to remember, I remember seeing vending machines with cigarettes in restaurants when I was a kid.
I remember that too, yeah.
And then it was just bombarded with all this anti-smoking stuff. And I don't smoke. I don't care for smoking, but it's not up to me to tell you if you do smoke that you can't smoke.
Sure.
Right? That's a choice. And it's the exact same kind of playbook that they're doing with gun owners now. And there's actually a bill, and I didn't actually research this for the podcast, but I remember reading it. There is a bill by one of the Democrat leaders where you can they want to be able to sue gun manufacturers if their guns are used in a shooting event.
Yeah, and that's come up a couple of times over the last 4 or 5 years, I think, and thankfully it hasn't gone anywhere. But it's kind of an odd thing if you think about it, because somebody uses your product incorrectly or in a heinous way. It's like suing a car manufacturer for drunk drivers.
Yeah, and it opens up this precedence for something just like that. It's extremely dangerous to any kind of commerce, not to the gun community, but any kind of commerce in the United States where any particular product manufacturer can be sued for misuse or deliberate intent of misusing a product.
Right. And to go back to, the binary argument is that I would say that people who own guns are the last people who want to have anybody, lose their life from misuse of a firearm. We've talked on the podcast several times about how, the reason that people carry a gun is because it's the last resort and it's a tool to save your life, in the event of something like that happening. It's not not because you want to take somebody's life. It's because you are, you're prepared to make that last kind of stand and to defend your life however you need to. And I think that the general public maybe equates gun ownership with being okay with people who are dead and or people who've lost their lives in these horrible shootings. And it's a way, it almost charges, I think, both sides up when people make inflammatory comments like that.
Well, and I think that's the exact intent, is to, instead of having some constructive dialogue where we could actually come together and really talk about the problem and the solutions, is they make this emotional argument where both people on both sides are extremely passionate, and then nothing gets resolved other than
right. And the other thing on top of all that is that I think to some degree that people who are supporters of gun control and people who are supporters of gun rights probably agree on more than they think. We've talked on the podcast several times about how we both talk about there are a lot of people who we think should not have the right to own a firearm, right? And you've, in your time in a shop, you've seen how many people who probably shouldn't have a firearm.
Yeah, I've actually denied people the right to buy firearms from the shop before.
Right. And that's one myth that we can dispel right now is that, just because somebody passes a background check and everything's kosher, that doesn't mean you have to sell them a firearm, as an FFL. You can deny anybody service or a gun for any reason.
And I can take an example of where that did happen. That Pulse night, I think it was the Pulse nightclub shooter. He actually tried to buy some body armor and some other stuff from a different gun store. And the guy just got a feeling. He's like, you know what? I'm not selling any of this stuff. You need to leave. And then he went to a separate store and purchased whatever he needed at that point. So that goes to show you that there are people, dealers that do deny firearms purchases. And I'm sure it happens a lot more than what gets out, because dealers aren't going to go and, I just canceled 16 people today. They're not going to go out and advertise it.
Right. Much less keep a record of it.
Yeah. Well, they do actually have to keep a record of it, but they're not publicizing that, which maybe they should more often, and just to show, hey, this does happen and it is working.
Yeah. And, we've talked about before too, how sometimes that just, the NICS check, the National Institute for I'm blanking on what it stands for.
National Instant Check System.
Yeah. Is that sometimes that all those agencies and those crime statistics or crime reports don't talk to each other, and that NICS is actually doing its job, but the people that are reporting to NICS are, not necessarily filling everything out the way it should. I think there was in Aurora, Illinois, there was that mass shooter a couple months ago, and he had his FOID card revoked, but because just the bureaucratic kind of mess or whatever, his concealed carry permit was allowed or whatever, or it was the other way around. I can't remember exactly, but some flag came up that where he shouldn't have had a firearm or something got revoked and he should have been visited by law enforcement, and it just fell through the cracks and never happened.
Right.
And there was go ahead.
I was maybe it's the same thing you were just going to say. What was that? There was a shooting. The dude was disarmed with discharge from the Navy.
Yeah.
And the Navy never reported that to the FBI, or somewhere that information was neglected or lost. And
some of the paperwork fell through the cracks,
which would have absolutely disqualified him from purchasing a firearm from a dealer. Right.
And so I think, as gun owners, we can agree that there are maybe things that can be done to strengthen NICS or to fix NICS. I mean, if you're a gun owner, you've probably heard that a few times before, but it's just talking about how all these agencies can better talk to each other, better communicate to make that instant check what it is,
And this is what's frustrating is we live in 2019. I can buy a car from my cell phone.
Yeah. Or a house even.
Yeah. Anything. Honestly, I could buy anything from my phone. Anything. But we can't get these these agencies to communicate with each other. That seems a little frustrating and odd.
Right. And that's one prime example of, I think, what people who support gun control and people who are pro-gun would agree on.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said earlier, I think many people would agree that there are a lot of people who shouldn't own firearms. And those people include, gun owners who think that there are other gun owners who shouldn't own firearms.
Yeah. And I mean, this could be a whole nother rabbit hole we could talk about, like, and I'm sure we're going to get into the red flag law thing. And I actually found a story about that popped up today, but, yeah, it could be a whole nother episode just on like that one topic of, hey, that person doesn't need a gun. But agencies need to do better. The local departments need to be given the right tools, to ensure that this stuff doesn't take place. And I agree with that. And I know that a lot of gun control advocates agree with that too.
Yeah. And it just goes to show that it's my personal theory that people will, most people agree on this stuff more than not, because nobody wants these tragedies to happen. Nobody's okay with people dying in mass shootings. Nobody. And it pisses me off to think that so much of the media paints gun owners as, well, yeah, they're all for it. Yeah, the NRA endorses it. No, they don't. Or what people will do is they'll tweet something and then that'll get viral or get spread one way or another. And it's like, man, it's not how people feel, I think the big difference really between that comes from knowledge. I think what kind of bothers me is people will spout out, gun control people or maybe just the uneducated folks will spout out about firearms or things that they don't know about and have their opinions, and people just tweet it, retweet it. I can't say that. Retweet it and spread it around. And it's just, you have to maybe do your research first or ask somebody, who is a gun owner and learn about it before you actually start talking about it. I mean, how many times have we, the gun community made fun of politicians that have no idea what they're talking about, but they're the ones responsible for making the laws about guns?
And it is so incredibly frustrating for them to argue a topic that they clearly do not understand.
Yeah, you could make that argument about almost any issue. You know what I mean? Like international trade or finance or anything. I'm not an expert in any of that stuff. Sure, I can have an opinion on it, but that opinion's probably going to be worth diddly compared to somebody who studies that professionally for a living.
Absolutely. And you'd look like a fool if you ever debated
but with firearms, it seems to be a different set of rules, I guess. I don't know.
Did you see that video? Oh, man, I'm sure I could find it. There was that lady, she was on CNN, and she's talking about double barrel high capacity magazine clips or something. Did you see that video?
Yeah, or like the guy from California, De Leon, I think, who talks about a 30-minute magazine clip that shoots 30 bullets a second.
And there was also the lady that wanted to ban. Now, this is going back a couple of years. She wanted to ban the magazines because it might have been Maxine Waters, actually. She wanted to ban the magazines because once the ammunition runs out, then people can't buy more. Clearly no clue about how.
Right. That's exactly how it works. Well, let's jump over to bans real quick, because obviously, I think a lot of people have been talking about assault weapons bans or banning, semi-automatic firearms or whatever. And I think people don't understand what they actually mean when they say that, because first of all, there's really no definition of an assault weapon. There's an assault rifle, and you could probably tell us what the definition of that is.
And from what I remember, now this could be off a little bit, but the term assault rifle came around, I think, during the Clinton era. So 94-ish, somewhere around there, to make things scary, right? Assault is definitely not, it's an action. It has nothing to do with any kind of implement. Mm-hmm. I could have a knife, and if I stab somebody with it, that's an assault weapon. So it's just a scary word that they use to try and drum up fear in the public, in my opinion, right? Maybe that's not the purpose, but that seems like what it happens. And often they refer to the AR-15 as the assault rifle 15. In fact, that was another comment that somebody made a few years ago. Excuse me, that AR-15 meant it's an assault rifle that can kill 15 people a second. Are you serious? And there's like some of our listeners are putting their hand to their face thinking, oh my gosh, This is ridiculous. Everybody knows, and if you don't know, AR stands for Armalite Rifle, who was the original patent holder for that style of firearm in the 1950s.
Yeah, it's almost 70 years old.
That gun has not changed since the late 1950s. Now, the military version is different. And this is another thing I argue a lot about with people online, because I'm a keyboard warrior when it comes to Facebook, is that these military style assault weapons. There is not a military unit in the history of the United States or the world, for that matter, that would ever issue an AR-15 to any soldier anywhere for any reason.
Right. And that goes into the difference between an AR-15 and an M16. And an M16 is actually an assault rifle. There's a difference between what people say assault weapon is, which is kind of this nebulous definition or amalgamation of, basically cosmetic features or convenience features, like a pistol grip or a flash hider or a barrel shroud even, or anything like that, which would, I imagine even a quad rail or any kind of rail system on an AR would qualify. But an assault rifle is a military style, selective fire weapon that can go between semi-automatic and fully automatic, which for all intents and purposes is not legal for the normal civilian to buy, modern day.
At least not easily.
Right.
There are firearms out there that are select fire that are available to civilians if you have a lot of time, if you've kept your nose clean, and you have a deep pocketbook. Yeah,
if you want to buy a full auto whatever, I mean, it basically starts at what, $8,000 because of, I think it's the Brady bill or the Brady law in 1986.
Yeah, I'm sure it was definitely Ronald Reagan, which a lot of people think, and Ronald was a great president, but he was not a good gun president. And yeah, he enacted some gun control legislation that anything pre-86 was kind of grandfathered in. Post-86, you're done. That you had to be a manufacturer, have a dealer demo only, or law enforcement.
Yeah, and that's still the case now. So it's a finite number of fully automatic weapons, and as time goes on, those weapons degrade, and those auto sears or whatever's registered with the ATF degrades, and you can't replace those.
And they are. I swear, I went to an ATF meeting a few months ago, and I think we even talked about this with the FBI. No, and the ATF actually. The ATF was there. And I think they threw out a number of like they still destroy a few per year.
Oh, I'm sure.
But or at least they demill them. Maybe not destroy them. Maybe they're to the point where they're unusable anymore, and the original owner turns them over for some reason. Probably more likely the case is somebody with an FFL either passed away and they can't transfer that firearm over, or they were up to no good and they got their FFL revoked.
But it's very few and far between.
Yeah, they are very limited. And that doesn't even go under something else, which is the what's the collector? There's another FFL which is just for collectors, and I can't remember the
Curio and Relic. It's an FFL 03.
There you go. That's the one, and that doesn't fall under that same category. It's a different FFL.
Yeah, you can't own some fully automatic firearms with that, or SBRs really, or anything, just because you have that for that matter.
You need to have your SOT. If you're a private civilian and you want to purchase, then there's some other forms you fill out, and you go through a way more in-depth background check than you would to get anything else.
Yeah.
It takes about a year to get your stuff back. Mostly that's because of backlog.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, just in reference to cost. Sorry, maybe this is going in the weeds a little bit. I happen to know I got to be delicate because I don't know if he's a listener or not. I know an individual that bought a 1960s era M16, an amazing piece of history. The Bakelite was perfect. Like, this gun was
historically significant.
For that, it was amazing. And he paid, what did he tell me? 20 grand.
Man.
So they're expensive. It's cost prohibitive.
Yep.
As it should
Right,
be.
because there's only, a finite number. There's nobody making new fully auto weapons that you can get. But to get back to the assault weapons ban a little bit, that's been tried before. In 1994, there was a federal assault weapons ban that banned certain kinds of semi-automatic weapons with, telescoping stocks, pistol grips, bayonet mounts, semi-automatic pistols with this, that, and the other. I mean, there's you can look at the details online, but it was basically a lot of cosmetic features that didn't really change the difference. I mean, you look at a Mini 14 as opposed to an AK or an AR, it's still a semi-automatic rifle.
That operates in the same basic principle.
Right. And, a lot of people use mini 14s or rifles without pistol grips as ranch guns or hunting guns or whatever. And, there's really no difference.
And here's the thing with that. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Because I guess I'm kind of on fire with this episode. So here's a thing too with that assault weapons ban, and they have been throwing this out, and you're going to hear this a lot because this is coming up again in this next session of Congress. They're talking about, well, the assault weapons ban worked in the 90s. Violent crime dropped. No, it didn't.
Not true.
What they did is they're cherry picking the statistics, and they're moving from the FBI's definition of a mass shooting, which is 4 or more in a public space, to 6 or more injured. So they've changed the criteria to shrink down the amount of people hurt. So it's completely different.
And there's even government findings like the National Institute of Justice, researched this, exact subject in 2004, and that found that if the assault weapons ban were renewed, the effects on gun violence would be small or perhaps too small for a reliable measurement. And the reasoning behind that was because, rifles referred to as assault rifles or assault weapons are rarely used in gun crimes.
About 2%. Which is too much. Yeah. It's too much. You're right. It's too much, but it's inconsequential.
Well, and if you look at the numbers of it, the actual amount of, gun homicides or gun deaths even, there's, I think most people familiar with gun crime statistics and stuff say that about 30,000 firearm deaths per year. That's about the average, which we can both agree. And I think anybody, gun owner or not, agrees is far too many.
Yeah, but that also includes suicide.
2/3 of which are suicide. So that leaves you about 10,000, homicides related to firearms.
But that also includes gang violence.
Half of which are gang related. And that's, probably on the conservative end. I think it's the FBI statistics that say about, 50 to 70% of which of those 10,000 homicides are gang related. And you can attribute most of those in major cities like LA, Chicago, New York, which also coincidentally have the strictest gun control in the country.
Which are all the same things they want implemented. The United
nationwide.
States. Yeah. Which I find intriguing.
Yep. And then so you leave, that leaves about 5,000, homicides or whatever, which does include mass shootings. But you look at the percentage of those, and 70 to 80% of those are handguns.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I was just looking up, and maybe I'll see if I can link this somehow to everybody else on the Facebook page, or at least to you, and then you can figure out. The FBI did a study that they must have recently unclassified, because on here it says unclassified on the report.
Mm-hmm.
Between 2014 and 2015, there was, and it says right at the beginning of the report, they didn't include any kind of defensive use and no gang violence in these reports. So there's 20 in 2014 and 20 in 2015 as far as mass shooting events or active shooter events or whatever. Sure. I think I went and counted those 40. They break down each one individually. Between location, shooter, age, and sex, and all that stuff. It's actually kind of an intriguing report. But I think there was like 7 on there that said rifle. It didn't say what kind of rifle. But they all, even the ones with the rifles, they all had handguns. Mm-hmm. So what's going to be easier? It's going to be so much easier for somebody to sneak into a movie theater or a school or whatever with a handgun than it would be with an AR-15.
Right. And I mean, handguns are they have a different kind of connotation in America, I would think, than rifles do either. I think a lot more people have handguns. I mean, there's more, 350 or 400 million guns in the country. And I think a lion's share of those are probably handguns because people have those for self-defense. And that's what a handgun means to a lot of people is self-defense, where, to the average citizen, maybe they have a handgun that's in their, in a safe, or it's in, their nightstand or something like that. And that may be the only gun that they have. But when you show them an AR-15 or something like that, it's something that they're unfamiliar with. And it's a lot scarier to them.
Yeah. Steven Crowder, like him or hate him or whatever, he did a video a few years ago that was actually pretty awesome. He was, I don't know where he was, but he set up on the sidewalk, and they posed as like these anti-gun people, and was having people fill out or sign a petition about getting rid of guns. And it was really intriguing watching these people go through, even people that claim to know a lot about firearms. They had no freaking clue. And just look through that. Just get on YouTube and whatever, search Steven Crowder gun videos. And he's got a few different gun videos that I find entertaining and educational in both aspects. Like I say, some people can't stand him, whatever, but it's just intriguing to look at the public who have no clue. And these are the people that are pushing gun control, and they have no clue about guns. They don't know what gun does what bullets get shot out of any gun. They just want to get rid of them off the streets.
Yeah, they don't care what it is. There's no education. There's no willingness to educate and learn what actually does the most damage. There's no, care about the science behind it. It's all just get rid of them all.
And it's just blind. It's just blind faith. Like they just believe CNN or Vox or whatever, and they just soak it all up like a sponge and then regurgitate the same misinformation as fact, which is completely refutable.
Well, and on top of that is, we talked about that guns aren't necessarily, well, let me put it this way. Guns can and are used every day for defensive purposes. We've talked about just defensive gun uses before, and we've talked about even that, what was it, recently released study or recently declassified study about how there were, literally millions of defensive gun uses every year in the U.S. Possibly up to 3 million a year. 3 million. Mm-hmm. That is great. That's thousands and thousands a day. I mean, that's 100 times the amount of gun deaths in the U.S.
And that never gets talked about. That's what's crazy is we only talk about and whatever it was, like these 2014-15 study, I think there was 214 deaths. That's too many. But that never discussed about how many thousands or millions of lives were saved between those 2 years. Never.
Right. And when we talk about defensive gun uses too, I mean, it's important to define that, where a DGU doesn't necessarily have to have a shot fired. It can just be a presentation of a firearm or.
Yeah. And it's an equalizer. And that's the thing is you're taking away or the anti-gunners or whatever you want to call them, they're taking away the opportunity of somebody saving a life. And then the same thing with like the magazine ban, which maybe you were going to talk about the magazine capacity ban.
I wasn't, but I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Well, how many rounds is enough? 10 rounds is enough? I recently heard a politician on the radio saying, if you can't get it done in 10 rounds, then you're not going to make it. So you're saying, and obviously has no clue. He's never taken a class when it comes to how many rounds it actually would take to stop somebody hopped up on drugs. Clearly, he doesn't understand. And what he's doing is he's taking away everybody's opportunity to defend themselves.
Right. And that's one thing to hear. It's a good point, too, is that, if you have doesn't matter gender, somebody who is 5'1" and 90 pounds, male or female, doesn't matter. Yeah. And you stack them up against somebody who's 6'5" and, 300 pounds, of pure muscle or whatever. That's an unfair fight. But having that person who's 5'1" and 90 pounds soaking wet has a firearm, that's a great equalizer.
Absolutely. Right. With Sam Colt, would they say that God made all men, but Sam Colt made them equal?
Yep.
It's the truth. Like, giving somebody a tool to defend themselves to save their lives or the lives of their children. That's the other thing you can think about too. What about the moms that are home when somebody breaks into their house? 10 rounds. Sorry. Well, there's 2 attackers. Take your pick. You can only maybe stop one of them and you're done.
Well, and we've talked about that before, where we've seen videos of, groups of people or gangs breaking into people's homes, rolling 4, 5, 6 deep. And, the only time where something bad doesn't happen maybe is that somebody has an AR-15 with 30 rounds ready to go.
Yeah. And that's happening more and more. Well, home invasions, which brings me to another thing we can talk about, and I'm sure will come up later, but yeah, it's sad to think that they're wanting to take away our right, which I feel is a God-given right to preserve my life, my family, and those
The
around
right to
me.
defend yourself.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one interesting thing too, is that, people argue a lot about the Second Amendment and what it means or whatever. And I think the consensus is, at least in the gun world, is that and we've had some guests echo this in podcasts previous, some a little bit more spiritedly than others, but the Second Amendment is, about protecting against tyranny.
Yeah. Well, and it was never designed for hunting. And in fact, I got it in a small debate that didn't last very long because he never talked back to me. But they only had muskets back in and that is completely untrue. In fact, there were civilians that owned frigates that were used to fight against the British. That's like saying this guy had a tank or an aircraft carrier for a civilian.
Right.
So, and not only that, they had things like a puckle gun, which was pretty amazing piece of engineering for the day, or cannons, which would have been artillery now.
Yeah, full-on cannons that civilians owned.
Yeah, so it was far beyond hunting. Yeah, maybe it encompassed the right to be able to go and preserve for your family and put food on the table, but it was definitely about keeping a tyrannical government from coming back, because they had just kicked the British out.
Yep. And people will argue too that, people who are for gun rights, and I think I would count myself in one of these people, is that, you can't, if you remove the Second Amendment, how are you going to protect the First Amendment?
Well, and it's a false hope to believe that it would only stop at the second.
Well, because think about the Fourth Amendment is, unlawful search and seizure. How are you going to be able to protect yourself against that if you don't have a firearm, or you don't have a means to defend yourself?
And to me, those red flag laws are absolutely less than a Second Amendment problem, more of a Fourth Amendment thing, because no due process. They're coming in and take your guns, and anybody can say it. I just read a story today about this guy, I think in Wisconsin, because something on Facebook didn't look quite right. The judge ordered the cops to go take his guns because of a post on Facebook. The guy, what he ended up doing is he went to a different state to buy a high-capacity magazine because he was pissed that the local government restricted 30-round magazines. That was his scary comment, that they figured he was going to go do a mass shooting.
Well, and I mean, we can't necessarily condone that you break the law in your own state and go to another state to do that.
No,
but
that absolutely
the
not.
frustration, it can be empathized with. You know what I mean?
But there are other instances of those red flag laws where people have died. There was one, I think, last week, and I'm sure this is all anecdotal right now because I don't have the information in front of me. But cops went to take a gun. The guy, damn right, he's going to fight back. He got in a gunfight with the cops and was killed.
Yeah. I mean, you've heard, and there have been stories too, again, anecdotal, but about, there are no-knock raids or SWAT teams or whatever that break into homes of law-abiding citizens or whatever, and they defend themselves or they get killed, or, it turns into a whole this big mess.
Yeah. And the person's dead now, can't defend himself. Right.
Exactly. So it's frustrating. It's a tough spot because I think a lot of gun owners feel like they're backed up into a corner with all these, and it's understandable and it's okay to be emotional and be upset about these things. And it's an emotionally charged, argument, I think, on either side. But I think the thing to remember for everybody is that nobody wants people to lose their life because of this. But, America is a unique place in the world, and that we have this etched into our Constitution. But then, they talk about, we talk about other countries or whatever, and look to other countries that, have either enacted gun laws or that have, a different set of circumstances. It's kind of apples and oranges. You can't really make that comparison.
No. And we've talked about where those are privileges in those countries, not rights. And they'll always point to Australia. Well, look at the Australian gun buyback program, which was a mandatory turn your firearms over program. Which
is also known as confiscation.
Yeah. And they were not even compensated worth what the guns values were at. But violent crime had already dropped when they initiated their gun control laws. But once they stopped talking about shooting shooting crimes, of course it's going to drop. They hid those statistics and look, our stuff dropped. I lived in Australia. There are so many home invasions, violent home invasions that happen every day, but those are different. Yeah, because those people lost the ability to defend themselves in their home. And we talked to Chris, right? Didn't he say something like, if you defended yourself in the home, you're going to jail?
Right. There's no protection against no castle doctrine or stand your ground laws or anything like that.
So how is that free? That's not free to me.
Right. Well, and the thing is, you talk about violent crime, in the U.S., at least, according to the Pew Research Center, that, violent crime has gone down sharply over the last 25 years. And on top of that, there's more guns now than there ever have been in the country. So
absolutely,
if there's more guns and less crime, then what are we trying to fight against?
And we see that. We referenced Chicago and California and Detroit and Baltimore. That experiment that they're doing is a perfect example of how it's not working with the laws that they want. Those cities are extremely violent. I don't even like going to California. And I probably will never take my family to California, which is awful because it's a fantastic state. But I don't want to deal with
it's a beautiful state. Well, and then going back to other countries too, you looked at other countries around the world like Switzerland, Israel, or Canada, or whatever, have similar or higher firearm ownership rates than we do. I mean, and in Israel, I mean, it's as in the military, you're required to carry your firearm almost everywhere you go if you're active duty military, and their homicide rates and violent crime rates are a lot lower, compared. So it's not necessarily the guns, I don't think, Well,
and then they bring up this whole thing of, the United States, we're number one in gun violence. No, actually, we're not. If you took out Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans, Dallas, if you take out these major cities where all this stuff is happening, we're down at the bottom of the list. It's not even a fair comparison. It's those cities of the high concentration of people that skew those statistics. You're telling me that England doesn't have gun violence. Well, first of all, they no longer have the ability to really shoot a gun unless you're part of a club and you have to go through this rigmarole to have a gun. But they're not counting gun violence because they don't want to. There's still people that get shot in England.
Right. I mean, and what's happening now is more and more people are getting stabbed, and there's more stabbings. I remember we talked about that in a podcast a while ago about how just stabbings have become such a big problem in there because the guns are so restricted. The access to them is a lot more restricted now, but people could still get knives, and now they're trying to ban like butter knives and any kind of edged weapons at all.
Yeah. I was, in fact, one of those, I think it was in 2015, that guy in California that stabbed a bunch of people and then ran over a bunch of people and then shot somebody. It was all in one event, and he stabbed 17 people. And then he ran over him. Like,
that's insane.
But guns are the problem. No, it's the dude that's it's the racist or the supremacist or whatever that just hates. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, even in Japan, there was a couple months ago, I think there was a story about a guy who basically burned a building down with like 30 people in it. And, most, if not all of those 30 people died. And it was from arson. It's the intent, and it's, like you said, the hatred and the anger and the rage. That's what's really propelling people to do this because, and I think we've probably talked about this before. And again, it's anecdotal, but, in the 1960s or the 70s and even the 80s, people rode into town or rode into school with rifles on the backs of their trucks.
Yeah. Even in the 90s. I remember my buddies in high school had their gun racks full with their windows down.
While they went to school. Nothing ever happened.
Nope. Nobody messed with their stuff.
I think there's a different change. I think, and I'm not going to say that it's a simple answer or whatever. I think there's a lot of different things that go into effect with it, but there's a lot more than just guns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I pulled up this statistic and this is actually from PBS, which is kind of surprising. So here's the top 20 countries, according to PBS, which again, I can't verify this source at all, but El Salvador, this is deaths per 100,000. So El Salvador is number one.
And that's per capita. And so one thing I'll point out is that the population of El Salvador is a fraction of, what the U.S. is, because there's about 350 million people in the U.S. So by the numbers, if there's more people, there's going to be more murders.
You would think.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think statistically that's
but
the way
El
it
Salvador
was.
has a population of 6 million people. So that's less than, New York City.
Yeah, way less. And per capita, they had almost 4 times as many as the United States. Almost 4 times.
That's the whole country, the whole U.S., right?
The United States, not one state, the entire United States. Next is Venezuela. You heard about those guys, right? They took away their opportunity to defend themselves. Then what happened?
And they're trying to get it back.
Yeah. They lost a bunch, man. 12,000 people to gun death.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. And then Guatemala, Colombia, Greenland, which actually surprises me.
That is surprising.
Is number 5. Honduras at 6. The U.S. Virgin Islands, but I'm sure they got a lot of drug problems down there.
I mean, not to change the subject too much, but if you are looking at, what happens to a population without, the Second Amendment or the right to defend yourself or whatever, look at Hong Kong right now.
Yeah. And what's amazing is they're crying for the same rights the United States have. In fact, they've said if we had the Second Amendment, we could fight China right now. Think about that. These are people that grew up in a communist country that wish they had the rights that we have now, and we're pissing them away.
Right. And the military is telling them to stand down. They're throwing tear gas at them. And, you see, I've seen quite a few videos on Reddit and online about, military, personnel in full gear armed with rifles and, full BDUs going into the subway and trying to stop people from protesting. And it's terrifying. I mean, can you imagine that happening in the U.S.?
Well, think about it. So here's a little reference, okay? What do they say about Donald Trump? Now, Donald Trump is not my most favorite president. I'm just going to say that right now. So what does the left say about Donald Trump? He's a tyrant. He's awful. He's a racist. He's ruining this country. But you need to give the government your guns.
Yeah, and you know what? And even me as a more moderate-leaning person, that logic is just so backwards to me. Is that
it makes no sense.
If you're saying that somebody is, threatening your freedom and, taking this country in a direction you don't want it to go, and you're afraid for your safety and your liberty and your right to speak out, wouldn't you want to have the Second Amendment backing you up no matter what?
Yeah. So if you get into a conversation with somebody who's a little less than gun friendly, bring that up. Well, what do you think about Donald Trump? Well, he's awful. Well, then why do we need to give guns away? The other thing is you hear about, well, these people are out, they outgun the cops. Okay. And you can talk for a second and ask them, well, do you think there's a systemic problem with police violence? Yeah, there is. Well, then why are we trusting just the cops with guns if there's a problem with cops being violent?
Right. What are you going to do against somebody with a firearm, whether they're a police officer or not?
So right there, their logic has got some flaws to it.
Yeah. And I think that I think on both sides of the camp that there are, there's an unwillingness to compromise and agree, but I think that might be where, the gun argument needs to go is maybe some sort of compromise to a degree of some kind, or at least an education on both sides. And I don't know, some sympathy maybe.
The downside is whenever you say compromise, like we're so used to the political version of compromise where we just give up everything and hope for the best.
Sure. But that's not compromise. And that hit me the other day. I was thinking about this about a week ago. And, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode was, to figure out what we can do as gun owners and how we can keep our rights the way they are. And, the thing about compromise is, if we're going to make it harder to get a firearm, you just to throw it out there or whatever. Well, why don't we, try to get national, reciprocity for concealed carry or the Hearing Protection Act, and to take silencers off the NFA. You know what I mean? There's no talk of that.
No, because they don't want any of that available. They think all of it's scary. They think every gun owner that's a member of the NRA wants to be John Wick and just shoot everybody they can. Now, I want to be able to shoot like John Wick, but only at paper targets, not at living people.
Right.
So the other thing is too is and I know you know this, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners understand this as well, that background checks already exist. Mm-hmm. The only thing is the gun show loophole. Well, that's misleading, because if there's a dealer there, they still by law have to do the paperwork and go through the background check. But private party sales are not under that that law. Just like buying a car, it's not the same thing as if I buy one from some guy on Facebook compared to if I go to a dealer.
Yeah, but I don't think people understand that. They call it one thing, and then everybody, and especially when they attach the word loophole to it, and then it's like, oh, well, anybody can get around buying a firearm, or any background check, and it's like not exactly,
That's why I wish I could just take all these people gun shopping and let them go through the process and fill out the paperwork and let them realize, hey, all this stuff that you think we need to have exists right now.
Well, and so that leads me to my next point and this is kind of the crux of the whole thing is, what can we do? How can we talk to people? How can we, respectfully show our opinion and that, be good stewards of the Second Amendment to preserve our rights? What do you think that you can do that comes to mind?
So the very first thing, and actually, remember that time? Hold on, this made me think of something else today. Remember that time, be early in the process of the podcast, where I said the Second Amendment will be completely different than what we understand it?
You've said that a few times, yes.
And I still stand by that comment.
Okay.
And hopefully I am wrong. I want to be wrong on that comment. So what can we do as gun owners to be to try and fight against the process? As be the squeaky wheel. Get in contact with your local legislators and with the folks in Washington, and be noisy and annoying. Not stupid and crazy. There's a difference. Like, don't say stupid stuff like, oh, I'm going to hurt you if you don't. No, that's going to get you in jail forever. But be involved. Be politically involved, and then take people shooting and teach other people that may not understand why you do what you do as far as competitive shooting or hunting or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to education, and I would even take it a step further. And as one person on YouTube who I follow a lot, Grand Thumb, is and he's kind of the inspiration for this episode as well, because he's a YouTube channel I follow, and I'm sure a lot of folks that listen to us follow about, he only talks about gear and shooting and stays out of politics, but he actually finally broke his silence on gun control and has a great video called Gun Control, just about all the myths and misconceptions and everything. And the thing that stuck with me most that he said is, how can we, be good stewards of the Second Amendment and protect the rights, is be kind and don't make fun of them. Don't make fun of anti-gun people. I mean, it's easy to make jokes and crack jokes about other people, but really being kind and listening and, hearing their side of things, I think would go a long way. As difficult as it may be.
And it is hard to not, I mean, listen, like, I'm not riled up, but I'm passionate about this kind of stuff because it's so much more than guns. It is the entire Constitution. And it just gets me so infuriated that people are so blinded by false misconceptions and lies and bad reporting practices that they're willing to start cutting out parts and pieces of the Constitution just to feel safe, but reality make no difference or make it worse.
Right. And if you look at it statistically, it's a very small, minuscule amount, probability that you'll be involved in a mass shooting or anything. And that does not by any means detract from the severity of what has happened. They're very, severe, exclamations, in the data about, and that's a horrible things that happen. But, just to feel safe when you really look at the statistics that it's not necessarily going to happen to you, it's hard to make that argument based on raw emotion, Yes.
And both sides, it's passionate and it's frustrating. Both sides of the argument need to be passionate, because that's the only way we will ever be able to make any kind of change, a productive change, unless it goes from the point, like you're saying, not to be belittling or condescending or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, be kind and be respectful and listen. If one of the hardest things that I've had to learn growing up is to, in an argument, whether it's with my parents or with friends or any kind of authority figure or whatever, is to let the other person speak and speak their piece and sit there and not jump at them if they pause or interrupt them or anything. Let them say their piece and really listen to them, and really just because I think most of the time people just want to be heard more than anything else. And with the way that, social media is and news and all that kind of stuff, people are just clamoring more to be heard and have their point of view be heard. And if you stop and listen to them, I think they're going to make that's going to be a lot more effective than trying to tell them your opinion. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's about respect. We need to respect both sides of the argument. As terrible as that might sound to some of the listeners out there, because there are a lot of guys and gals out there that are just fired up and they just want to punch somebody in the face over this. But you're right, it's the wrong way to go at it. Well, and we need to contact those who are in charge, let them know that our vote will not go to them if they pursue any of this kind of crap.
Right. And that's, that leads me to that point about, what you can do and who you can support. I don't, we've talked about it a few times. And I think in most of the gun world now, at least the contemporary gun world, is you can't really support the NRA. I mean, bump stocks went away because of them. There was talk about maybe pistol braces being banned. Thankfully, I don't think that's going to happen, but the NRA just kind of lets this stuff happen. And there's a lot of bureaucratic BS that's happening there. And I don't think that we can support them right now.
No. And it saddens me, honestly, because they used to be a fantastic organization. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but until they clean house, it's really hard to want to support them. But there's I'm going to see you same thing. There's other organizations out there within our state. We got the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, which is awesome. In fact, I just also became a member of the American Firearms Coalition.
Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America. Those are the people that are actually filing lawsuits, legislatively or judiciously trying to fight for our rights.
It's important, but don't forget to contact your legislators. Don't just wait for somebody else to do it. You need to be a little more proactive, and that's why we're at where we're now. I was no secret that I think bump stocks are stupid, but the problems is that was considered an accessory. Well, what other accessories do I put on my AR-15? A lot of other accessories. That's the slippery slope that we're going to be going down. You got to pay attention.
Yep. And I mean, like I said, they were talking about, there was a rumor going around the gun world that pistol braces were going to be banned because in one of the latest shootings, somebody had a pistol brace on their AR. And it's like, that doesn't necessarily contribute to the crime or not, or anything like that, or make it easier. But, the people not in the gun world don't understand that. And they said this was used in this heinous crime. Well, then we need to get rid of it. And that's not necessarily what the right way to go.
But we don't talk about whatever implement was used in the vast majority of other types of terrible murders out there, whether it be a car or a bomb or whatever. We're not protesting Ford because some dude tried to use a pickup to run over somebody, or Home Depot when that guy stole that Home Depot truck and drove it through the park.
I remember that.
Well, we don't talk about that.
It's a weird thing. And, I guess to close it out, really, it's just, we want you to do your research. We want you to make sure you have the statistics and really look at, what the science and what the numbers say, and have that, in your back pocket, and use that as a rational argument. But also, be kind, be sympathetic, and listen to people. That's the only way I think we can be good stewards of the Second Amendment and keep our rights.
Yeah, it's super, super important. And like I said earlier, this is less to do with the Second Amendment and more to do with the Constitution in a whole, because once they start nibbling at one right, they're not going to stop. They're going to start taking out other. In fact, they've already done some stuff with freedom of speech already. It's happening. So, man, just get involved.
And like you said, don't be afraid to contact your legislators, whether that's state senators, U.S. senators, congressmen, even the president, anybody. You have that's your freedom and your responsibility as a citizen to do that, and or to contribute to organizations that do that.
It's super frustrating when I hear them called our leaders. Well, our leaders in the House. Well, they're not. We are their leader. They work for us.
Yeah, we elected them.
Yeah, so don't get caught up in that crap either. And another thing, completely off topic, we're a republic, not a democracy. So remember that too. That drives me absolutely crazy.
Fair enough.
Sorry, that, like I said, completely off topic.
That's okay. Well, I think we'll close on that because we'll step off our soapboxes for now. But hopefully, we've kind of made our point that there are a lot of myths and misconceptions out there, and I think whether we like it or not, the responsibility is going to be on us gun owners and the gun world to preserve our rights, really explain what the reality is and what the science says, and to be good stewards of the Second Amendment. Because honestly, nobody else is going to do it for us. And honestly, and on top of that, making fun of the opposition and not listening to the opposition, or being compassionate is not going to get us anywhere.
Well, and it's not even the opposition anymore. It's independents and Republicans are seemingly on board too. So it's kind of an uphill battle. But be responsible and be proactive.
And be safe.
Yeah. Take somebody shooting that's never been shooting before.
Yes, thank you. That was a point that I forgot about. That's one way too, is to take somebody who, has never gone shooting before or has never shot an AR or whatever and show them what it's really like. I think that, we've had a couple of examples on the podcast. I've had some family come on the podcast and shoot an AR. A friend of mine who had never shot anything, I think, except for a BB gun. And, he shot a full auto. He went right from 22 rifle to full auto and handguns and everything. And he had a blast. Well, we might have to have him on again. And, those are some shining examples. Maybe we'll do a re-release of some of those episodes to help, illustrate those facts. And that's all it takes. Just one trip to the range and one positive experience.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun. Another thing too is spend some time and actually do some research too. Don't just be armed with, don't take my word for it or Mark's word for it. Like anything that we've shared, get online, do some research. Don't necessarily go to, I read this on Vox or even Fox News or whatever. Go to the actual source that's cited. Go to the FBI Uniform Crime Statistics. Do the research and go to the exact place where that information comes from, because you're going to be armed with knowledge and be able to maybe teach
and first source scientific studies like the FBI, the CDC, the NIH, the NIJ. I mean, these are all government organizations that are tasked with making these observations and doing the research. So you want to make sure you look at those.
And honestly. Yeah. And I know I was trying to find that CDC report, and I found it a lot more difficult to find information this go around than the last time we talked about this kind of stuff. And the actual report has never really been released. For some reason, they decided not to share that. Maybe it had something to do with it being conducted during the Obama administration and it didn't really work out, I think, the way he was hoping it would. But there's a lot of references like Gary Kleck, Professor Kleck,
or John Lott, or any of those.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and those are reputable guys too. Those aren't some schmucks. These guys are professors that write peer-reviewed studies and stuff. Like, these are legit. So,
yep. So do your research. Be safe. Be a good steward of the Second Amendment. If we missed anything too, let us know. podcast@iishooting.com, or send us a Facebook or Instagram message or anything at Range Minded Podcast. There's a bunch of different ways to get a hold of us, and I guess we'll leave it at that.
Also, can I just do one more plug for
sure.
Right On Optics? It's been so long since I shared. So if you don't know, I'm a pro staff for Right On Optics. If you're looking for some good optics at a great price, anything from, there's some stuff I can't talk about yet because I haven't brought out, but rifle optics, they got red dots, they got full on super magnified scopes. Mounts, all sorts of stuff, rings, all that stuff. Just jump on their website. You'll be surprised at the quality that you get for the price that you're paying. In fact, if you use my promo code when you buy anything, honestly, from the website, S Zimmerman, Zimmerman, you get 15% off. So
yeah, buddy, and Right On's good stuff too. We've talked to Justin.
Yeah, and there's a new rep in that area. I haven't met him yet.
Well, maybe we can have him on and we can talk about optics again, because that's always a fun subject. So
yeah, I think it'd be fun.
So, all right. Well, hey, like I said, be safe. Let us know if you have any questions. Be a good steward of the Second Amendment, and thank you for listening. And we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Range Minded. Find us online at Range Minded Podcast on Facebook, or send us an email at podcast@iishooting.com. We're always happy to get feedback, episode suggestions, whatever you want to send us, really. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and pretty much wherever else you get your podcasts from. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.